Alrighty, marine ecology peeps. We are talking plankton today. Plankton is probably one of my favorites. They are tiny. You don't see them very easily, but they are so incredibly cool, and they are one of my all-time favorite organisms within this unit to talk about. One of my favorite labs is in this unit. It is the Great Plankton Race, where we do a total bracket challenge and discuss buoyancy and staying afloat in the water column and things like that. So we'll get there, but for right now, let's do some notes on plankton. So, intro to plankton. When you think plankton, you probably think plankton from SpongeBob. He is actually a copepod, which is a plankton. But plankton are known as free floating organisms, any organisms that have a weak or no swimming ability, and they are at the mercy of the prevailing water movement. So, whatever the currents are, however the water is moving, that is how they will have to move and flow with them. So, here's some examples of lots of different types of plankton here. We've got more phytoplankton at the top. At the bottom, those look like mini shrimps, almost mini animals. We got a mini looking crab in there. Those are larvae, and those are very small animals, like animals at the larvae stage. And so those are zooplankton. They're animal-like. And then we even have on the right side here a larvae sea star, which are very cool looking. And that is again a zooplankton because they are at the mercy of the currents when they are small. When they grow, then they grow out of being a plankton. They're no longer a plankton and they become a nekton, which means they can move themselves within the water column. And nekton include fishes, marine mammals, marine reptiles, etc. We'll get to nekton when we get into Unit 5. Plankton are really important because they are the base of the food web. Our phytoplankton make the food. They live in the top layer of the ocean. That's the epipelagic zone, if you remember from last unit. And that is because they love light. They need light to make food. So that's where they live. And zooplankton are going to also be there as well because they eat the phytoplankton. Okay, so here is a cladogram of our ocean species getting more and more complex. So if you notice, chordata is boxed here. That's our fishes. We've got nematode, that's our worms. We've got arthropods, mollusks. We'll talk about those, cnidarians, porifera. We'll talk about those, and sea stars. So most of these right here, when they are in the form of larvae, they are plankton, but they are not plankton all the time. So cnidarians, if they're not in the ground sessile or on the ground planted sessile, they are going to be plankton. So technically jellyfish are plankton because they are mostly at the mercy of the water column. Okay, so these are some of our plankton phyla. So if we go on into the cladogram and we talk more about our actual plankton, lots of our plankton are in archaeobacteria or eubacteria. So some of them are, so one important one is cyanobacteria, remember first organism on the earth. And then we have protista. So protists, that's our algae, and our macroalgae, which technically is macroplankton. So we'll talk about that in this unit as well. And then we have jellyfish, comb jellies, copepods, and krill are all kind of known as plankton. These are more zooplankton because they are animals. But they can't move on their own as well. They have weak swimming ability, so they're considered plankton. And then everything down here that we talked about before in the previous slide, those are going to be plankton at a larval form. They're also called meroplankton. Meroplankton, so only part of their life. Mero kind of means only part of their life. They transition out of being a plankton. So you see jellyfish at the top here, and then at the bottom you see fish fry, so those are plankton when they are in the form of larvae. All right, the next thing that we're going to talk about is we're going to break up plankton into a couple really important groups. These are groups that you'll need to know. You'll need to know their names. You need to know what they are. So the major phytoplankton that we're going to talk about are diatoms and dinoflagellates. Say it with me, dinoflagellates. It's kind of hard to say, but it's like flagella, dinosaur flagella, dinoflagellates, and then diatoms. And these are ones that make their own food. Diatoms is actually what you see in this picture on the top with the purple, very symmetrical and glass-like shapes. Diatoms are beautiful, silicate-made phytoplankton that make their own food that are very cool. They are very complex. And then dinoflagellates are responsible for a lot of the dangerous algae blooms that I talked about before. Those are the toxic ones. We'll talk about one of those, if we haven't already, called Pfiesteria, which is a North Carolina dinoflagellate that can be very damaging to fishes. And then our two major groups of zooplankton are copepods and krill. So copepods are a huge food source for krill, and krill are the backbone of the Antarctic food web. They are the main food for our whales, our baleen whales. Those are the whales that have the teeth-like or hair-like teeth. They don't hunt. They are skim feeders or gulp feeders. And then we'd also say meroplankton is a part of that zooplankton group. So I didn't list that there, but just know that zooplankton also include that meroplankton ones that are larvae form. And this is a picture of krill down here, teeny tiny orange, pink looking, basically mini shrimp. Okay, here's some more pictures of dinatoms. They're split into two groups. There is pennate dinatoms, and they're in this bullet form, almost look like a sugar snap pea a little bit, but they are symmetrical. Both the top and the bottom are the same. And then our central ones are entirely symmetrical. So they're circular. They have two cases. It kind of looks like a macaron, I believe. It's pronounced macaron when it looks like a brightly colored cookie, a brightly colored Oreo almost. And so that is a macaron or central diatom. Okay, so here's our two other pictures. So that was a 3D microscope you're looking at. This is a 2D microscope. So very pretty looking central and pennate. Kind of almost looks like a pen. So that's hopefully how you can remember it. And then our dinoflagellates. So one of the most common dinoflagellates is called serratium. And it is this beautiful, it has got a legs down at the bottom here. So it almost looks like a drawn out triangle with flagella, multiple flagella. So 1, 2, 3, 4 flagella on this one. Some of them can have more than that. There might even be one that we can't see on the other side because this is, again, a light microscope. And they are very small. Notice 3 micrometers, very small. But they have, you see, green pigment in there, so they're ones that make their own food. And then this is another illustrated depiction. So not only do they have these flagellates along the outside, you can almost see this like squiggly line coming down here. There are two sides to this dinoflagellate, and there's actually a flagella going inside right here and going like wheeling all the way around. And so that's actually how it helps it to spin. So it will spin itself so it sinks very slowly in the water column. So those are dinoflagellates. Another one is Pfiesteria. We'll talk about that. Here are some examples of some more phytoplankton. So there's many different types of phytoplankton. These are different types of dinoflagellates. They're very cool looking. There are so many that we haven't even discovered or we're still discovering. So there are these, when I was in school, my professor would always call them little green things. So it'd be LGTs. And they were just little round green phytoplankton that we had not identified yet. And we had no idea, like not no idea what they were, but there are so many little ones that look so similar. We hadn't classified them into a specific place. So we just called them LGTs, little green things. All right, phytoplankton, talking specifically more about phytoplankton. So these are our diatoms and dinoflagellates. They photosynthesize and produce 70% of the Earth's oxygen in the atmosphere. So they produce a lot of oxygen. And we don't think of them all the time. We think of trees when we think of photosynthesis. We don't necessarily think of phytoplankton, and they make up a large amount, if not the majority amount, of the oxygen in Earth's atmosphere. They also make up the base of the food chain, so extremely important in many different ways. They can be found in high latitudes of cold water. So they like colder areas. They're nutrient rich. Colder areas are, it's easier for them to stay afloat because cold water is denser. They like shallow areas as well. They like areas that have upwelling, and they like plenty of light. So they stay up near the surface as much as possible. So here's some other examples of our phytoplankton. Skeletonema right here, microcystis, detonula, casinodiscus right here, Cataceris, and Pleurosigma. So these are all some really cool ones that hopefully you'll be able to see when we take a walk down to Lake Johnson and we pull out a sample, we bring it back to the class, and we get to look at it. So hopefully you'll be able to see some of these examples right there in under the slide so that you can be like, wow, I've probably literally ingested these before, which is totally fine, totally normal. You won't die. But they're things that are in our water systems that are super important to the entire ecosystem. All right, some adaptations that plankton have. Plankton are more dense or heavy than seawater normally, so they have several adaptations to help them stay afloat in the water column. They want to stay in the photic zone as much as possible, so they're going to try to reduce the sinkage that they have. So they have a small size. They have spines that extend, like you can see in this Cataceris right here. They will sink very slowly because of that, because the large surface area will basically cling on to water molecules and make it hard for it to sink. They incorporate oils into their body. They'll like have proteins that make certain oils. They'll have to lower their density because, oil is always floats on top of water. They employ gas-filled floats. Some of our macroalgae do that more. They will also try to reduce their weight through osmosis. So they'll try to get rid of water. And then they also will form spiral chains, again, like the picture you see there, so that they can slowly fall instead of falling straight down. They also have some anti-predator mechanisms. So you see our copepod here, Mr. Plankton, chum bucket owner. He has some anti-predator mechanisms as well as actual copepods. So some of them have elongated cells, so it's easier for them to slip away from predators. They might have spines like he has on his antennae here. They form chains and they colonize. They can release toxins like our dinoflagellates do. They can also jump. We've definitely seen Plankton, owner of the chum bucket, do that. But they can also like do little hops within the water. Hopefully, don't know if I'll have it yet by the time I'm making this video, but hopefully I got copepods for you guys to see in person. I was able to order some last year, so hopefully I got you some to see in person under a microscope. But if I did, you can see those. If not, we'll watch a video or something. They're pretty cool. All right. So another thing about phytoplankton is obviously they give us a primary production, and they are necessary for us to get food, to get glucose as sugar. So they take in sunlight, water, and CO2, and they release a organic compound called glucose or sugar, and they release oxygen. Both things that do photosynthesis and things that do chemosynthesis do those things. They ingest different things. So chemosynthesis, water, CO2, and then a chemical. It can be either methane or it can be um, hydrogen sulfide. Sorry, I was like totally blanking on the word for a second there. But it's either methane or it's hydrogen sulfide. Um, Most important things that they need for photosynthesis would be light, nutrients, and then other things that affect primary productivity will be hydrography. So the type of currents, the oceanography, the type of currents, the gyres, the surface winds, and everything that acts on the water masses can actually change the amount of primary production. So currents, gyres, surface winds, nutrient supplies, and light all impact the primary production of the ocean. It's a little bit different than on land, and so that's why we mention it. Okay, briefly, we're going to talk about the carbon cycle. You should know this from biology, but essentially, we know what goes in and comes out to make food. The photosynthesis formula, you should know that. But in general, there are three processes that release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere or carbon into the environment, and that's decomposition, so the breaking of things down, breaking down of things, and releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere by bacteria or anything like that. Combustion, so burning things, burning fossil fuels, and respiration. Me breathing out right now, just telling you the notes, is releasing CO2 into the atmosphere. As we process sugars, we respire and breathe out CO2. The only process that can absorb carbon from the environment is photosynthesis. Without photosynthesis, we would be in trouble with the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We are in trouble now with the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, but we'd be in more trouble. So we need to have more algae, we need to have more trees, and we need to combust less so that we can start mitigating or managing this amount of carbon in our atmosphere. The ocean also can absorb, and it doesn't change it from carbon dioxide into anything, but it absorbs it, it takes it in. The ocean absorbs 1/3 of that carbon in the atmosphere. So as the waves churn and things like that, it starts to absorb carbon dioxide. And this actually is lowering the acidity level of the ocean. Some of you may have heard of ocean acidification. It is a serious issue that breaks down the hard shells of organisms, including corals. So it makes corals a lot more difficult to form. It makes crabs. Crabs have to molt, and then they make a new shell every few years. And if they don't have calcium carbonate, they can't make their shells. And carbonic acid actually breaks that down, and that's what happens when CO2 and water react together. So that is a serious issue on top of the warming of the planet and the seas. All right, these macroalgae we're going to talk about next are macroplanktons. They are other ways that we make food, or the ocean makes food. So phytoplankton and algae is the way that we do that. They're also called seaweeds. They are not plants. Seaweed are not plants. Algae is not a plant. It is a protus. It's plant-like, but not a protus. So plants have to have, if something is considered a plant, they have to actually have essentially veins. They have a way to transport water and food throughout their organism, their body, through cells. Protists don't have that. They go from cell to cell, just like inside of like smaller organisms without veins, without a cardiovascular system. Um, so they don't have those things and other things that make plants plants. So they're plant-like, but they're not true plants. All of that, yeah, all of that to say they're not real plants. There are three types. You will have to know those three types: Phaeophyta, Rhodophyta, and Chlorophyta. So Phaeophyta is brown, Rhodophyta is red, and chlorophyll with chlorophyll is green algae. Actually, Phaeophyta and Rhodophyta have chlorophyll, but they're different types of chlorophyll, which make different pigments, the red and the brown pigment. Lots of times people think kelp is green. It is not. It is brown. It is a brown algae. Sometimes it can look green, but it is a brown algae. An example of red algae is shown there. We'll see some in class, actually. And then Chlorophyta, sea lettuce is a very common one. Its main genus is called ulva, and there's a lot of different types of ulva. That's ulva, ulva. Okay, so here is another example of macroalgae. This is a red Rhodophyta polysiphonia. So it's really cool. This is what it looks like from far away. If you zoom in, these are all its cells kind of sandwiched together. There's a total of like 6 cells here, and it makes these long branch-like breakoffs. And then these circles here are its reproductive organs. This is a female polysiphonia. And they sometimes will have polysiphonia that are both. They have both fertilizing and egg producing parts. And then sometimes there are male only and female only polysiphonia. This is Irish moss. It's another type of Rhodophyra. It's very beautiful. I have a couple of pressed algae that looks like this. So basically, I took a sample and I pressed it on a piece of paper, and it's going to stay pretty forever. This is laminaria or laminaria. Sorry, this is laminaria, and it is a brown algae, and it has these gas-filled bulbs. It's a type of kelp, basically. This is another one. This is sargassum. It again is brown. It has these little bulbs, but this is very small. And sargassum is extremely important. Sea turtles, baby sea turtles will actually live in sargassum on these sargassum rafts for the first year or so of their lives, if not more. So without these, our baby sea turtles would definitely die. There are parts of the world called the Sargassum Sea that are completely filled with sargassum. They're like little rafts that many baby fish and baby young animals will use, not just sea turtles, but you know how I feel about sea turtles. Okay, again, ulva, sea lettuce. We got some green Chlorophyta here, and then we've got some actual sea grasses, which this is actually a plant. Sea grasses are actually real plants. They're really actually grass, essentially underwater grass. Okay, sea grasses are plants, but algae are protists. Okay. And then this last green one here that I think is really cool, it's codium. It's also called dead man's fingers. I think because it looks like dead man's fingers, maybe. But they're very round and like squishy and kind of gross. So I could see them being very similar to waterlogged dead man's fingers. Anyway, moving on. Okay, lastly, we're going to talk about krill. So krill are probably the most important species in the Southern Ocean or Antarctic Ocean. They feed on phytoplankton, and these are small crustaceans. They're very small shrimp, basically. And they are the main food source for many marine mammals, many birds, many fish, and even squid. They play an important role in repackaging those large amounts of energy from phytoplankton into nutrients that are available on a mass scale for bigger species. They are known as a keystone species, which, if you don't know that term, that essentially means the entire ecosystem would be wiped out without krill. So krill are one of the most abundant species on the planet, and they're one of the most important species on the planet. All right, that concludes Plankton. One of my faves. I hope you enjoyed. Please let me know if you have any questions.